All right. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us for today's training. My name is Raymond Partolan, and I'm the National Field Director for Asian and Pacific Islander American Vote, or APIAVote for short. So as folks continue to join us, we're going to go ahead and get started. Please take a moment to introduce yourself to us by placing your name, preferred pronouns, any organization you might be affiliated with, and where you're calling in from in the chat. So to model, my name is Raymond. I use he, him pronouns. I am with APIAVote, and I am calling in from Atlanta, Georgia. If you've joined a Charge Hub before at a prior training or at one of our redistricting community colleges, welcome back. Charge, or the Coalition Hub Advancing Redistricting and Grassroots Engagement, is a national coalition of organizations committed to building power in our communities by educating and encouraging our communities to participate in the redistricting process. So on behalf of all of our organizations in the Charge Coalition, we are so happy to have you here. Today's training is co-presented by APIAVote, Common Cause, and the National Congress of American Indians. So if you're here with us today, you probably know that redistricting is a once-in-a-decade opportunity for us to change the way our district lines are drawn at all levels of government so that we can be fairly represented. Ultimately, we want to live in districts where we have a fair shot at electing the candidates of our choice and having our needs and concerns seen and heard. One way that we can engage in this process is by providing testimony to redistricting authorities on behalf of our communities. So today, we're going to be taking you all through what happens behind the scenes as our communities engage in the redistricting process. And later on in the training, you'll have the opportunity to hear from 2 former redistricting commissioners and 1 current state legislator about what's on their minds when they're listening to community testimony and what they would see as a good testimony. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. And give me just a second to stop sharing my sound so you don't hear my emails coming in. Um, so a couple of notes about our Zoom space today. This training is in a Zoom meeting format instead of a webinar. We were intentional about this choice because we want everyone to be engaged and we want today's training to be as interactive as possible. But to avoid background noise, please leave yourself muted unless you are actively speaking. There is an interactive element to today's training towards the middle of our 1-hour session. So please be prepared to engage with us. Go ahead and do whatever you need to do. Get yourself in that mindset because later on we are going to be asking some of you to volunteer to give us your insight. You are welcome to use the chat function to interact with us, each other, and to ask your questions. We're also going to use the chat to drop links to various resources that might be helpful to you. We are also recording today's training in active speaker view only. This means that you will not appear in the recording unless you are actively speaking. We encourage everyone to leave their videos on as much as possible during the training, as that'll help us engage with you all better. But if you need to shut your video off for any reason, of course you can do so. The video helps us to gauge your reactions. I'm looking at all of y'all with your videos on and trying to gauge, are we being impactful in our training right now? And especially during the interactive portion of our training a little bit later on today. If you have any questions or concerns throughout the training, let us know in the chat, and we're going to do our best to resolve your issue. And by that, I mean, shoot me a DM or shoot one of our other co-trainers today a DM in Zoom. So let's briefly go over our agenda. We're going to start with just an introduction to redistricting advocacy. We want to talk about some effective messages that you can use, some important things to consider when giving testimony on issues, best practices, strategies, etc. In part 2, we're going to hear from the experts. We are joined today by the former chair of the Arizona Redistricting Commission and the former chair of the California Redistricting Commission, and also a current state representative from the state of Georgia. Then we're going to be doing an interactive activity where we are going to present you with a fictional community with demographics and all, and quotes from neighbors. And we're going to ask you to develop your own 1 to 2 minute oral testimony on behalf of your community in support of an imaginary map proposal or or in opposition to an imaginary map proposal, whatever you want to make of it. And then lastly, we're going to answer any questions that you all have, and we'll have a closing. So we're going to, as I mentioned, we're going to kick things off today with an overview of redistricting advocacy and some best practices for developing an effective testimony. So for this section of today's training, I am joined by my colleague, Sandra Mitrovic of the National Congress of American Indians.
Hi, everyone. As Raymond noted, my name is Sandra, and I'm the Civic Engagement Associate at the National Congress of American Indians. Raymond and I will cover some very important things you need to know to improve transparency during the redistricting process, and also, as he mentioned, to create an effective testimony on behalf of your community. So we hope by at this point that you've had the opportunity to understand what redistricting is and why it matters. We also hope that you have the opportunity to participate in either a training on community mapping or any other trainings related to redistricting at this point. Today specifically, we're going to equip you with all the tools you need to create and deliver what we consider to be a pretty effective testimony. So as Raymond just mentioned, later on in this training, you'll have the opportunity to develop that 1 to 2 minute oral testimony on behalf of an imaginary community that we've developed. So definitely keep all of that in mind. So in the intro, we're also going to make sure that people joining us today understand how to use advocacy strategies during redistricting. We're going to highlight some of the most effective methods that we have found. Due to COVID, we'll also spend some time discussing digital and virtual strategies because we're still in that space. We also want to make sure that groups feel comfortable with those strategies and those platforms. We'll review what makes a strong public testimony and also some of the best practices that we've found. And then finally, we're going to cover how regular people like me and you can work to ensure redistricting process is accessible and transparent. We know that COVID protocols may push some states towards closed meetings or limited public notice, and so we'll address that as well. Raymond?
Sorry, muted. Advocacy around redistricting at the state and local level can yield big results in support of your redistricting goals, while also giving volunteers and organizers engagement opportunities to share their stories with elected officials or commissioners. Getting the public involved in the redistricting process is a great way to give a voice to communities and create access to the political process. Many groups and communities have never engaged with redistricting, me included. This is actually my first redistricting cycle. And this is an opportunity to bring more voices into a space that has traditionally been full of legislators, lobbyists, and other outside actors. Through community input and testimony, there is more of a chance that mapping plans will be adopted that reflect how communities see themselves and build more political power for underrepresented groups that have been split into multiple districts. And finally, advocacy and engagement allows for stronger oversight of the mapping process. Through public testimony and other engagement strategies, legislators and commissioners can be held more accountable.
So here are some general engagement strategies for advocacy work. These may vary depending on the state or local process, but generally speaking, you'll want to research first and foremost who the decision makers are. So in the majority of the areas, legislators remain the primary decision makers for maps. However, we know that a number of states and local areas have changed the way they carry out the redistricting process and are now served by an independent or bipartisan redistricting commission. So once decision makers are then identified, it's important to work with any of your volunteers, coalitions to map out who are the most effective messengers that should provide testimony. And we're all familiar with who those folks are in our own communities. We want to make sure that those, for example, key decision makers, like in Michigan, would be majority Flint residents, for example. Your volunteers and coalition testimony should probably be then from that region. So definitely keep in mind, look around the table, see who isn't present, and we can do some outreach and coalition building there. Second, all engagement strategies should include ways for community members to attend and participate in redistricting hearings and education meetings. We want to remind ourselves the end goal of advocacy is having as many people turn out for public testimony. But we also want to make sure that we're, of course, investing the time and getting the communities involved, first with that education outreach, sessions and workshops, and then also just really making sure there's that connection to why redistricting matters to specific individuals. We all know getting people to the table is really, really important, and we need to make sure it matters. Federal and state redistricting often starts before local efforts. So we need to make sure we're finding out the hearing schedules, rules for testifying, any time limits. And we know that those time limits, if any of you've given that testimony, oftentimes we hear that magic 2 minutes, right? So we want to make sure that we're allowing ourselves enough time and those kinds of things. Last but not least, I would just say, just make your concerns known and work with your community together to ensure those maps truly represent who you are as a community and that all organizations are represented. Raymond?
Thank you, Sandra. Since we are still largely operating in a virtual and digital environment, it's important for us to consider the various ways we can engage effectively and safely into space. So if your state's legislative redistricting committee or if the redistricting commission is hosting virtual meetings or hearings, be sure to log in early to familiarize yourself with the committee or commission's preferred platform and ensure that there are no technology issues. Make sure that all the speakers in your group know how to use the software and are coordinated with others who will be speaking. Now, if your state does not offer virtual hearings or events, consider creating your own to capture community input that can be shared with the legislature or commission. So that could be like hosting your own testimony session and then presenting that session as a recording to the commission or to the legislature. Other ideas could be hosting a screening party. Check your state legislature's website or the commission's website in your state for opportunities to submit written testimony. Other opportunities to engage virtually could be phone or text campaigns, and public testimony and turnout at hearings can be a really impactful way to show your support or your opposition to different maps that are being proposed. So make sure that you're organizing folks and getting people to attend these hearings. That is super important. We want our communities to be seen and heard.
Absolutely. And another part that we really want to stress is, along with those timelines, please also keep in mind when creating these strategies, it's going to depend on whether your state or local process runs through the legislative process or through a commission. In states with the legislative process, advocates should be mindful that the notice of public hearings, as we just mentioned, may not be as transparent. They may be a little bit more difficult to find. So we want to make sure that we're constantly staying on track of that because there may be a delay in getting that information. The other thing that we want to mention too is there's always that opportunity for a significant amount of behind the scenes lobbying activity. And so we definitely are going to walk through. We have wonderful guests today that are also going to talk about kind of that process and what that looks like. In states with the commission process, appointed individuals make up the map drawers. So elected officials may also be a part of the commission, but in selection could be done by the state Supreme Court or through another independent entity. So we just want to make sure you know that there's some differences there. Raymond?
Thank you, Sandra. And I also want to mention that we are going to be sharing all of these slides with you after the presentation, and including a recording of today's training. So if we have to speed through some of these slides just in the interest of time, you will be getting the slides from us later. So here on your screen, you'll see a couple of different transparency measures and accountability rules in redistricting that should be applicable during the redistricting process. These are some of the things that would help improve transparency and accountability. Yes. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thanks, Raymond. So I'm just going to have you, as Raymond mentioned, just for time's sake, definitely take a look at the slide on your screen. These are obviously a lot of different reasons why testifying is such a powerful tool in our toolbox. not only for redistricting, but also if you can think across the board, if any of you have given testimony, you know how important it is to not only building skills for your organization and community. It can apply to a multitude of issues. It also provides an opportunity for our organizations to get on the record. And then again, also, it just makes sure that as we look at potential activity down the line, that we're part of that conversation from the beginning, the foundation moving forward, and it can strengthen a lot of our work that we're doing. Raymond?
Awesome. All right. So at the beginning, we told you we would give you the various elements of what we think comprises an effective testimony. So here on your screen, you'll see some examples of that. First, effective testimony establishes your credentials, who you are. Secondly, it clearly identifies the topic and purpose or critical point of your statement. Thirdly, the best testimony tells a story that engages the audience. And in this case, your audience is the commission or the members of the state legislative committee that's working on redistricting. And fourth, it contains facts or evidence to support your points that are succinctly provided. And then you'll also specify a very specific ask. What is it that you want the commission or the legislature to do?
Thank you. So we're going to go into just a quick definition of what is testimony. We've already talked a lot about the importance of testimony, but we want to stress that and underscore, regardless of your prior experience and expertise in writing testimony or providing testimony, it's super important for citizens to be involved in this process. They don't just want to hear from political parties and lobbyists, they want to hear from you. So that's why these trainings are so crucial. That's why we're providing all of these. But just what is testimony? So we want to go through quickly just two key features of giving testimony. One, it's a written document. And then also testimony contains the content of what you will say when you're testifying. So through our trainings, we've given a lot of information. You're going to hear about the 3 C's here in just a few moments and what you can put in testimony. But it's really about that content that you're going to submit in writing and that you're going to provide in terms of oral testimony. Thinking about oral testimony, that's testifying. So testifying is that oral, providing that testimony that you've written down. And so we just want to make sure all the key pieces are going to be there. And we're going to talk about some of those key parts here in just a few moments.
All right. So here on your screen is an example of a written testimony. Not really going to spend too much time on this, but essentially this testimony contains information on the writer, what they're asking for, and the reasoning for their position.
Key parts of testimony that I just mentioned, we talk about briefly is I want to make sure that folks know when you're including your testimony, it definitely starts with an introduction. It's a way of describing yourself, your organization, coalitions, communities that you represent. You always want to make sure that that's pretty clear, but also keep in mind all as part of that testimony, what a good map looks like that keeps your community together. So that's going to include some information that could include some storytelling and those things. You'll see in the example, it says, hello committee, my name is blank. I've been a resident for data 5 years. I'm here with a group of my neighbors and XYZ coalition. So definitely, again, those data points, the storytelling, really give them a vision of who your community is and kind of what you're there for.
Awesome. So part of your testimony is defining your community. So when we talk about defining your community, we're talking about things like, what is it that makes your neighborhood unique? And why is that uniqueness an important factor that should be considered during the redistricting process? What are the reasons that the commission or the legislators who are drawing or who are approving these lines, what are the reasons that they should keep your specific community together? These are things you're going to have to ask yourself and ask your neighbors and ask the folks in your coalitions. What are the different ways that in which we can convince the commissioners and the legislators that our communities deserve to remain together during this process?
Last but not least, any good testimony is prepared. You need to be prepared for counter arguments, right? So definitely you may get those questions. It is unlikely, but it's possible that a commissioner will have a question or raise a point that's counter to your arguments. So we want to make sure that you're prepared in advance. So for example, the pros and cons of grouping low-income voters into one district. And then also just make sure that if you're asked a question that you don't have an answer for, it's always okay to say, I don't necessarily have all of that information or that data, but I'm willing to go back and get that and bring that back to the commission. So that's really important as well.
Awesome. So the last thing that we're going to leave you all with on some of the best practices around testimony is what we call the 3 C's. So this is really easy to remember because all of these words start with the letter C. But when we're talking about the 3 C's, we're talking about culture, concerns, and count. So basically, these are 3 things that you can keep in mind when you're starting to develop that story element of your testimony. When you're talking about your community and you're talking about the ways in which your community is unique and why it should remain together. So with culture, you're talking about your community's history. Do y'all share a language or a dialect? Does your community share any holidays? Do y'all have shared values? For the concerns element, consider what issues need attention from the government. Like, are there any community projects that need resources? Are there past examples of elected officials ignoring your community's concerns? These are all things that you can work into your testimony. And finally, and I would say it's an important part, but don't discount the other 2 parts, the culture and the concerns. But count is basically the data. What data do you have that shows this, that you can present that strengthens your stories? For example, the number of people in your community, the percentage of your community that is of a particular race, or perhaps the percentage of your community that is comprised of communities of color. These are the actual numbers that you're going to use to supplement your testimony. And again, we're going to be sharing all of these slides. I know we went through this first part relatively quickly, but let's go ahead and get some interaction from you all. So up here on your screen is a short prompt based on what you've just learned in the first part of this presentation. Go ahead and tell us in the chat, what are some important things to consider when giving testimony on any issue? And today we're talking about redistricting in particular, but you can testify on anything. You can support or oppose any bill that comes before a legislature. Ultimately, our representatives represent us, and they answer to us, and we have to hold elected officials accountable. So while you all are doing that in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague Alex from Common Cause, who is going to introduce herself and then introduce our 3 special guests for today, which is what I'm sure you all have been waiting for.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Hope that you're doing well today. So my name is Alexandra. I am the redistricting consultant for the National Redistricting Team here at Common Cause. And we are very excited to introduce our special guests. We are pleased to welcome 3 special guests to give some insight into what redistricting commissioners and legislators are listening out for when hearing testimony from the community. So I'll now introduce them one by one. First up, I'm happy to introduce Commissioner Colleen Coyle-Mathis. As a registered independent from Tucson, Arizona, Colleen Coyle-Mathis volunteered to serve and was unanimously chosen to serve as the chair of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission by the 4 appointed commissioners in 2011. Her tenure ended in January 2011 when the new chair for the current redistricting cycle was selected. Colleen has shared her experience in other states seeking to adopt independent redistricting, as well as at numerous conferences and forums. Colleen earned a master's degree in environmental management from Yale University and a bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Illinois. She is a demand consultant for large mining trucks at Caterpillar, an affiliate for the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University, and principal at Willet Creek Consulting, specializing in nonprofit management, communications, and business development. Next, I'd like to introduce Connie Galambos Malloy. Prior to leading Fantarea, Connie served as portfolio director at the James Irvine Foundation. There, she led grant making and staff for voter and civic engagement, workforce and economic development, and social impact bonds. Connie brings a background as one of Fantarea's former grantee partners from her time at Urban Habitat, a community-based environmental justice organization. Earlier in her career, Connie served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Eastern Bolivia and as a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Fellow in California. Connie now serves on the Funders Committee for Civic Participation's National Board and on the local board of Southern California's Grantmakers. She is a founding partner with Kids for Freedoms and Justice and co-founded a grassroots global network for adopted and fostered adults of African descent. She served a 10-year term as chair of California's inaugural Citizens Redistricting Commission from 2010 to 2020 and continues to promote redistricting reform nationally. Connie received her Master of City and Regional Planning degree at the University of California at Berkeley and a BA in Communications and Spanish at La Sierra University. In 2021, in the wake of Hurricanes Eta and Iota, she co-founded the Raizal Diaspora Network of San Andreas, Providence, and Santa Catalina, Colombia's Caribbean islands. Finally, I am delighted to introduce State Representative Donna McLeod of Georgia. Representative McLeod was born in the island of Jamaica and grew up in Canada. She moved to Georgia in 1998 and became a U.S. citizen in 2012. She has lived in the same house in Lawrenceville for 20 years. Donna McLeod is a chemical engineer with over 20 years experience in quality assurance management / engineering, and she is now the president / CEO of Inverqual LLC, a quality assurance regulatory consulting company specializing in medical devices, food, plastics, and pharmaceuticals. Representative McLeod recognizes knowledge as the ultimate power that enables more highly informed people to make better decisions that ultimately improve their lives in every respect. She believes that every individual should be actively involved in the decision-making process of the people they empower to lead, those who make the rules and regulations through which we are governed. Passionate about civic responsibility and civic engagement, she emphasizes that through our vote, we have a say in the decisions that affect virtually every aspect of our daily lives. In 2016, she ran for the Georgia House of Representatives, District 105 in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Representative McLeod was endorsed by President Barack Obama. She lost the race by 222 votes, less than 1% in a gerrymandered district. Representative McLeod ran again in 2018. On November 6, 2018, she was elected state representative for District 105, winning with over 4,000 votes. In 2018, she also earned the endorsements of both President Barack Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder. Ms. McLeod is a co-founder of the CANI Incorporated Community Action Network Initiative, a nonprofit 501c3 organization that helps educate and inform people of their civic and societal rights and responsibilities. The CANI organization has helped to register over 30,000 new voters. She was awarded the Georgia Secretary of State Outstanding Citizen Award in 2015, RevUp's Sankofa Leadership in 2017, Gwinnett County Democratic Party Leadership / Service Award in 2017, and Freedom Fighter Award from the family in 2018. She also sits on the STEM board at Discovery High School. Each of our special guests will now spend about 3 to 5 minutes talking about the importance of community members providing testimony and any insight or advice that they have to share as folks start to prepare their communities or themselves to give testimonies during the redistricting process.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Or Ray, would you like to say anything first?
No, go right ahead.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, yes, so I'm Colleen Mathis and delighted to be part of a celebrity panel. That word caught my eye when I was first invited by Ms. Fang. Thank you. And it's an honor to be with my fellow panelists. What an august group of folks. And I also applaud these organizations for coming up with this training because frankly, it's super useful. And I wish I've actually never given testimony in a public setting before. So you might discount my remarks, but I've been on the receiving end big time, serving as chair for the past 10 years in Arizona. And it was a pretty contentious environment, as some of you may know. Arizona was pretty famous this last time around. We had 5 major lawsuits, 2 of which went all the way to the US Supreme Court. The commission fortunately prevailed in all of them. And but it was a rocky road, no doubt. And So having been on the receiving end, I definitely have some opinions on what makes good testimony, and happy to share or answer questions later too, if anybody has anything that I don't cover. But I think what Sandra and Raymond already discussed and presented was spot on, frankly. It's first and foremost, who you say you are. Be authentic. I mean, that is just job one as somebody providing testimony to a commission. And in my case, I'm a citizen volunteer. I'm not a professional mapper. I'm not a legislator. I'm just somebody who volunteered to serve on an independent redistricting commission. And by the way, that's something that Arizona has had since 2000. The citizens back then had the foresight and wherewithal to get independent redistricting on the ballot. And citizens voted for it. They liked what they heard and decided they wanted to have an independent commission be responsible for both congressional and legislative district lines. So we drew two sets of maps. A big part, and really the reason for independent redistricting is to engage the public. And so that's where this training and your testifying and your participation in your state's redistricting effort is just crucial. It's especially if you're coming from a state with independent redistricting, it's more incumbent upon you, I would say, to get out there and do these things that you're being trained on today, and show up at meetings if you can. But if it's all virtual, do it that way. But however you do it, just do it, because I can tell you it all becomes part of the record. At least it did in Arizona, whether it was submitted virtually online through our website portal or in person. We had a lot of meetings and hearings in person. We had public comment every single opportunity, all of those meetings and hearings, for people to come and tell us what they thought. And I'd say that some of the most effective testimony was when people did their homework, which is obvious, as you might imagine. And you heard that in some of the points given already. Do your research, know who your audience is, who these commissioners are, whoever's going to be these decision makers. And then align yourself, find other groups that feel the same way you do. And I'll give you just one example quickly out of Northern Arizona, because it was so effective and powerful. And what happened is, there are 22 Native American tribes, federally recognized tribes in Arizona. And a number of them happen to be in the Northeast and northern part of the state. And many of them, I can't say all of them because I don't know exactly how many were part of this exact coalition, but a number of them, along with the business communities, the economic development organizations in this region, the cities and the counties, all aligned and came in with a cohesive story. That word story is really important. And presented to the commission a complete map of the district that they wanted drawn for them. And it made our job so much easier, because when you have that many people aligned and on the same page, you can say, here it is, commission, here's this map, and these are the lines we want, and this is why. And then they repeated that at each meeting. And they would come, they'd be engaged, they'd be in the audience and make sure that they would provide testimony again. Repetition, I can't underestimate that either. That's also really helpful to have that. That doesn't mean repeating the same talking points or bullet points when you have an organized effort, because that can be frankly inauthentic at times, and it becomes clear that there's some ulterior motive. But to the extent you can just have a collaborative coalition of like-minded people that are coming together from disparate, backgrounds, frankly, all the better. So I would encourage you to do that if you can in your community. And I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer more questions if anybody has them later.
Thank you so much, Colleen. I'm now going to turn it over to Connie. Connie, will you provide us with your valuable insight?
Sure, and it's Colleen and I just made virtual acquaintances in the last few months, and it's wonderful to be able to also learn from colleagues who've been in the same shoes. I wish we'd known each other back when we were in the thick of it, actually on the commissions, but better late than never. We hope we're helpful to folks like yourselves. As mentioned, I'm a former member of the California Redistricting Commission. I was part of the inaugural group. So the first time that California ever implemented the Independent Citizens Commission. And our charge was to draw the Senate, Assembly, Congressional, and Board of Equalization districts for the state. And Board of Equalization are tax districts, essentially. My background had really been in the same shoes that many of you have. I had, come up in communities where we were fighting environmental justice issues, mostly around land use policy and environmental, refineries and where they were sited and how they were able to pollute our communities without repercussions. And part of the nonprofit work that I did around that was how do we change the decision makers and the basis on which those decision makers on these critical commissions and councils are making these massive decisions over resources and public policy. And so I would support, we had a program in the Bay Area called the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute, and we would help support grassroots community leaders and activists to be able to apply for and to get seated on various commissions, and then to help make sure that they were successful while they were there, helping support them with, technical assistance and being able to make sure that the community was mobilized to go out and make testimony. So that was my work. I had never been on a commission myself. And then as I learned about the Redistricting Commission and was really horrified as someone who really believes in democracy at how redistricting happened, I decided, well, I might as well apply. Little did I expect that, out of 30,000 plus applications that I would be chosen to sit on the commission, and was barely 30 years old at the time. We had about a 40-year spread between the youngest and the oldest commissioner. It is really intimidating to be one of the only, not just on my commission, but really when I looked across public service volunteerism at a broader level locally and around the state, there just weren't many people in my stage of life that were weighing in and representing what it was like to be a full-time mom and student and, renting and all the different dimensions of what I brought to the table. So on the commission, very high stakes place to learn how to be a commissioner when you're really, at the crux of dealing with power and resources and race and all of those things. And you're doing all of that on the public record. Also, I would say that for those of you that are in places where an independent or quasi-independent model is being used for the first time, to also have some just awareness and empathy that the commissioners and even the staff are really building the model as they're trying to implement it, right? There's not, particularly at the time when we first did ours, there wasn't any other real model to look towards. And so we were just grappling with, like, how do we get the state, who really doesn't want us to, the legislators don't want us to exist, so they don't even want to pay for our pencils, much less how do we draw good districts. And so there's just a lot of things going on behind the scenes that means that whatever you can do to make your testimony really clear and actionable is going to make it much more likely that it's able to be impactful. Because many commissioners actually go into this, to dedicate that much time. Many people have really great intentions. The things that I looked for in terms of testimony were particularly around communities of interest. Who are they? Who are the actual people that we're talking about? Where are they? Physically, where are they located? This is where I'd really encourage drawing maps, whether it's handwritten or something that you can generate on the computer or through one of these platforms, or to just name physical boundaries of where people are located. Even if you don't make a map, something as simple as naming intersections, cross streets, geographic boundaries helps to be able for the commissioners who are working with the mappers to actually define in a physical way where a given community is. It was also really important for me to understand what was at stake for a given community in a given configuration of maps. For example, sometimes we would get testimony that was really compelling, and it was about something that really was locally driven. It was about the dog park down the street, which is really something that falls more to the city council and the planning commissions, is not something that your congressional representative is going to be dealing with. And so kind of being able to differentiate and understand what are the issues that a community is facing, and what is the type of district that most is relevant to getting that issue fixed. It also is really important for us as commissioners. We have to balance the whole, and in a state as big and diverse and as California, we have to understand and reconcile how communities of interest relate to each other. Geographically, do they overlap with each other? Are they adjacent to each other? Do they have do different communities of interest actually maybe share some of the same concerns? They might name it differently, but maybe they share some of the same concerns over the quality of their education in their public school, or X other issue, versus other communities of interest where it might be actually really distinct what they need and what they want and how they see the vision for how their community is unfolding. So that ability to name commonalities and where there might be opportunities for and a history of collaboration across different communities, or where there's been real challenges and divergence, is a really important part for a commissioner to understand, and something that, quite frankly, no matter what data we get from the census or other sources, we only really can flesh that out from hearing directly from testimony. The last thing I'll just say is that the California Commission last round, we faced 7 lawsuits, and we won all of the 7 lawsuits. Our maps were upheld within the courts. And the reasoning for that is not necessarily that we had the perfect set of maps. Hindsight is always 20/20. If we'd had a little more time and a little more money, I'm sure there's lots of cleanup that we could have done. But really, we heard time and time again from the judges presiding that the process had clarity, it had integrity, that we were responsive, and we had a really robust public record of what were the driving factors and considerations that led to the lines on the maps that we drew. And so think of yourselves really as partners with the commissioners, in that you're helping build the public record that, for someone like me who came into this with a background in advocacy and work around social justice, I still needed to be able to justify and point to the data that led me to various conclusions. And so you are a part of making your experiences and observations and information about your community really clear and visible and actionable on the part of those who are drawing these lines. So thank you so much for your service, and also for inviting me to be with you today.
Connie, thank you so much. You made some really excellent points about people's roles in this process. You all are listening out for that testimony and listening out for people's personal knowledge of their own communities. So again, really appreciate you and Colleen for your experience on your respective redistricting commissions. And now we're happy to hear from Representative Donna McLeod as well, who I've known for a very long time, being a Georgia native myself. So Representative McLeod, would you share a couple of words with us?
Absolutely. Thank you, Raymond, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for being interested in this process. I can tell you that in 2010, this was not the interest level at all in the state of Georgia. And I think that I'm so very happy to see this interest level. I'm going to step back a little bit and just give some historical context for why we're at this point. The census is really the trigger mechanism for this. Every 10 years. And unfortunately, the map I looked at during last year, we were doing the census and trying to weed through the census and get people to, get counted. The census has a lot of impact on what monies come down to our state that you actually pay to the federal government and what comes back to our state. And this part of it is, of course, how we actually divvy up districts. But before we get to the redistricting, we have reapportionment, and those numbers already came down, right? So we already have those numbers. That's how much the United States has actually grown since the last time the census was made. And we're about 30 million more people. And you know, some people are concerned that the numbers might not be accurate because of the pandemic. But I know that, you know, those of us that were on the ground did everything we could to get everybody as best we could counted. And so now we are here at the redistricting, and I was here in 2010 when the last census, and I was not a citizen at that time. I didn't become a citizen until 2012, but I did understand the need to count everybody. It was not relevant if you were a citizen or not. It's how many bodies are in the United States of America. So that point needs to be very, very clear on why we're here. I also want to touch on how voting is so impactful to this process as well. So a lot of people must understand that there was the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. So in 2013, part of the Voting Rights Act of 65 was struck down, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And in that section, it had where we could look at how maps are actually drawn, and so there's no, you know, there's no longer that cushion. And so living in a state like Georgia, where we do have a very partisan issue in the state of Georgia, so the map is most of the map drawn is going to be drawn by the party in power. And so that's why it's so very important that everyone that's in this chat really express upon the people that they're talking to. Their involvement is so important, because as a legislator and who's elected, you are truly our boss, and what you have to say must matter. And if it doesn't matter, then you pick up yourself and go to the booth and show them who really is the boss, and that's with your vote. And so I wanted to pull everything together in that sense. And with my talking, my points on redistricting, again, I think the two ladies before had some excellent points, so I'm not going to go over those, but I will say this: it should never matter the color of your skin, your zip code. It should always be about making sure that the people are choosing their elected official, and not the elected official choosing the people who they're supposed to represent. And so for me, I think it's so very important that everybody that's on this Zoom call truly take this seriously, because this is going to affect us for the next 10 years, what we do today. And as a person in 2015, the district that I now represent was actually gerrymandered. And this is a little bit different from redistricting. Gerrymandering is really done on a partisan basis, and driven mostly because somebody wanted their party to remain in power. Redistricting shouldn't be that way. It should be about making sure the people have the representation that they need. So with reapportionment, now we are going to look at redistricting, because we do have growth, right? Georgia didn't gain a congressional seat, but we didn't lose one either. But we do know that we added numbers. And because we added people, we're going to look at how much is the state district going to be, how big is the Senate district going to be, and how big the congressional districts are going to be. And that's why it's so important that we understand about redistricting. There are several town halls that are going on. I put it in the chat, the legislative link to the House website, that you can see when they're going to be having public hearings. And you can also look at town halls. There are other organizations doing it, like Fair Count, and the Georgia House Democratic Caucus is also doing some. But what I really want from everyone to understand is how important that you are a part of this process, and how much we need you to speak up and speak out about what you want for yourself and your community, and your assistance to us as legislators, because we're going to be the ones drawing the maps. I can tell you that. We're going to be looking at the commissioners' maps as well. But what your part in this, I can't tell you how important and monumental your part in this process will be for us, because we have to listen to you, because I'm telling you, if we don't listen to you, you have the power, and that is called your vote. And so I'm asking everyone that is on this line, on this Zoom, to make sure that you are a part of this process 100%. Every single one of us matter. Every single one of us. I say this all the time. You deserve a return on investment. You pay taxes, and that's what the government is run on, your taxes. We collect $27 billion in the state of Georgia from you. 75% come directly from income tax and sales tax. Another 19% comes from your fees that you might pay. And then the last 6% comes from businesses. And 280,000 businesses in the state of Georgia does not pay taxes. So at the end of the day, you're the most important part of our government, because you pay taxes, and you should always demand a return on that investment. Nobody plays the stock market just for fun. They want a return on investment. You should demand one too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative McLeod. I put this in the chat, but we had planned to do an interactive activity with you all today, as we noted at the beginning of tonight's training, but unfortunately, it looks like we are coming up on being out of time. Unfortunately, an hour does go by really quickly. But while we have our special guests here, Connie, Colleen, and Representative McLeod, this is a really great opportunity for all of us to pick their brains and to hear what they have to say about things that are important to us. So if folks have questions, and I hope Connie, Colleen, and Representative McLeod are okay with this, if folks have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or unmute and ask them yourself. We want to make sure that everyone walks away from today feeling like they know a little bit more about the redistricting process than they did coming into today. So since we don't have any other questions in the, okay, here we go. From James, this is a question for Colleen and Connie. Can you describe the pressure being exerted by sitting legislators? How much deference were other commissioners given to incumbency, and how can community groups successfully push their demands when, for example, an incumbent may feel threatened? That's a really good question. Do y'all have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump in and just say this is an area where it's really important to understand what the commission that you're seeking to influence, what their parameters are. In California, we were strictly prohibited from looking at matters of incumbency. So we essentially had blinders on. We weren't allowed to look at political affiliation, incumbency. And so once we actually got some draft maps out there, we learned all kinds of interesting things. Like we had drawn sitting legislators into the same district because we were doing it just based on the information that we were collecting from the public, not with the mindset of how do we protect these seats. Now, that said, even though elected officials were not able to interact with the commission, we're certainly aware that there were community groups or individuals who actually like their legislators. And so some of their testimony about their community and that they felt satisfied with their community leadership was actually about the fact that they had a strong relationship with their legislator. So, but it was very different than other states where there's, and even localities where there may be a consideration or a priority given to making sure that you don't interfere with someone's incumbency or leadership. So make sure you do your homework and you know what you're working with on that front.
For my part, from Arizona, I could talk about the answer to this question for an hour, because not only did the Arizona legislature sue for independent redistricting at all, whether that's constitutional, which ultimately we prevailed, thankfully, but it was a 5-4 vote at the Supreme Court. Otherwise, we wouldn't have independent redistricting, at least for congressional district lines. So there was a lot of pressure in that regard, but also, a group, our Senate, ended up concurring with the governor to remove me from office. So there was definitely pressure on that front too, and they would have succeeded if not for the Arizona Supreme Court stepping in and reinstating me. So there's definitely a lot of pressure being influenced and flexed on the sidelines. And a lot of them showed up at our meetings, and some did give testimony during public comment. They would come up and they couldn't say where they lived because we couldn't consider incumbency. We couldn't consider their address. So they were forbidden from saying anything about where they personally lived. And Arizona also has that rule where you start from a clean slate. So no consideration of incumbency at all. We do, however, consider partisan registration later on in the mapping process, because we have a competitiveness requirement in Arizona where we're supposed to be drawing fair and competitive districts to the extent practicable. And the way you can draw a competitive district is to figure out how close to 50-50 partisan registration is in your district. So we had to consider that later, but the incumbency situation, we did not. So, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of, they're in the room. I'll put it that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Connie and Colleen. And our last question for this evening, I am going to direct this at Representative McLeod. And I'm only going to ask the first part of this question. What is the role of young people in this process? How do we get more young people involved?
So obviously young people talk better to young people than some of us older people, right? So, but their role, this is probably going to impact them more than anyone else, right? Because it's 10 years. So if you are 18 today, you'll be 28 before another census. And so I think that young people need to know their stake in it. I think when people understand their stake in something, they take it more seriously, right? Because we
I think we lost Representative McLeod. Colleen or Connie, do y'all have any?
have to talk to young people in the sense. Have you lost me? You guys can hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yes.
Yeah, so young people, this is going to affect them for the next 10 years. So if they're 18 today, 28 before they have another chance of changing. What kind of business comes into their thing? Do they care about environmental issues? Who is at the table for environmental issues? You know what you're passionate about? If you want it to happen, this is the process that you need to be involved with, because again, for the next 10 years, you're going to have to live with it. Like I said, if you're 18 today, you'll be 28 before the next census comes up. And so young people have a lot to lose in this. You know, I'm 53 years old. I mean, my time is ticking. While theirs is just beginning. And I think having other young people that already have been involved in young people giving testimony, I saw that at the beginning of our legislative hearing last month. And those young people, I mean, they spoke up about what they're interested in and why this process is so very important to them. So I'm asking anyone with young people to get them involved and let them know how much it's going to impact their lives for the next 10 years. And if they are passionate about certain issues, environmental issues, whatever issue, LGBTQ issues, they need to know that this truly will determine if their vote is going to have an impact, where their community is going to, if their community is going to have a voice in the overall state. And so I ask that everyone that knows young people, please explain to them just what redistricting means and how long it lasts for and why they need to be involved, because this is about their future. Like I said, I don't know what's going to happen to me next year, but they're more likely to live 10 more years than I am. And so they should be very focused on what the future looks like for them. And a lot of them will be, again, by the time the next census, they will probably be parents themselves. And, just looking at the years in the next 10 years, how much things can happen. And so we need to do that now. The urgency of now is now. It's not tomorrow, it's now. We're in an urgency. As you can see, there's so many things going on with the pandemic of racism, sexism, homophobia, phobic. We need to be at the table now, not tomorrow. And so, and especially in the state of Georgia that we live in, we really have to keep the legislative body and our elected officials, and I happen to be one of them, accountable to you, who pay the taxes and who deserve that return on investment. So young people, absolutely, we need to do just one for young people, to let them understand just how important their voice is in this arena of redistricting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Representative McLeod. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I know we are now at the hour, so I am going to post a link to an evaluation form for our training tonight. Feel free to give us your honest feedback. Tell us how we did. Apologies for this shift in the agenda. Did not expect time to go by that quickly. But again, thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Yana Allen. She is the Director of Civic Engagement and Special Projects at the National Congress of American Indians, to close us out for tonight.
Right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Raymond. And thank you so much to all of our wonderful celebrity judges and guests this evening. This has been a really informative conversation, and we're just really grateful to have all of your perspectives here at the table. I actually think this is some of the most valuable information we've had around this topic, and so your insight is really invaluable to us, so thank you. And as Raymond mentioned, I am Yana Allen, and I work with the National Congress of American Indians and lead our civic engagement work. So with that, I'm really, really excited to just kind of give you a last couple of points that were mentioned this evening to take with you before we leave. So remember that tonight we've learned that redistricting matters because, one, it gives communities a voice and access to the vital political process. It also may help to create maps that better represent everyone within your community. And it also allows for community oversight in this whole process. And so we want to make sure that tonight you take with you the ideas of really being able to be prepared, be authentic to who you are, build coalitions with like-minded groups, and share your stories. Really tell the story of your community through the places, the people, the cultures, and landmarks that make you who you are. And remember that all of your testimony does become part of the public record, so that, folks can actually look back and see exactly all of the information that you're providing to them, and look back and really make sure that those maps and the redistricting process really does follow, the community that you've put forward. And so lastly, I just want to encourage everyone. I know there was a question in the chat about how to reach out to folks on a one-on-one level. And we can't emphasize enough the need to be a part of a coalition, because coalition really is at the heart of the grassroots movement. And so you'll be able to make connections and network with people who are relatable to you and your issues that you care about. So with that, we'll be happy to share the Redistricting Community College resource in the chat. There's plenty of more information on testimony, but also redistricting as a process overall through our Charge Hub. So please stay tuned and look out for more trainings with the Charge Coalition. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Raymond, but thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Yo perreo sola.